بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا وينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا زدنا من فضلك وعلما زدنا منك فضلا وعلما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Right, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. I always start with the Hajj course is basically thanking you guys for inviting me, because one of the main concepts of the Hajj is that you're ambassadors for your communities. A lot of people don't think this, they think it's my journey going on Hajj, but the reality is what I want you to see yourselves as is that every year Allah from every community sends forth ambassadors to go and visit the King, to represent their communities. And so this is lost on us in the modern world a lot. Where I lived in Morocco, we had still a kingship, and with the King of Morocco especially, things are very traditional in terms of their rituals and formalities. So every year on the Eid al-Kabir, to the best of my knowledge, if my memory serves me correct, in Morocco, like all his representatives, all his subjects will come and visit him in Rabat, in the palace, and they all line up and they kiss his hand in order to reaffirm their pledge of allegiance. Now, that when you live in that sort of country with that sort of understanding, it gives you a greater appreciation of what the Hajj is, because what you're doing is you're like ambassadors, representatives of your communities going forward in order to pledge your allegiance, but also to represent, as I said, to represent before Allah your communities. And so you have, and we can look at it from two perspectives. You have the honor of doing it, but also you have a responsibility on your shoulders. And so that's why dua is very, very important for yourselves and for your people, because especially in this time and age where we're feeling very unsafe in our communities, to really so that gives you a real sense of purpose as well. I think when you go on the Hajj, you think, oh wow, this isn't just about me, it's about my communities as well, and it's about the current state of affairs and what things we should be focusing upon. So your du'as become focused. Okay, what are the real important issues that we have to really address as a community? So that sends you back when you leave Hajj with a sense of and a purpose for your communities and for yourself as well, what your role is, in whatever capacity that is. And so, and that we know that travelling in Arabic, safar, means to expose something, and so the travelling exposes who you truly are. You can't keep, you only can keep up your pretensions for a short while before people start figuring out who you really are when you're travelling. If that's the case with a normal journey, then what about Hajj? Okay, so there's this thing I talk about that I like to focus on Hajj as well, is everyone's got this this idea of the perfect Hajj and how they're going to do something. Everything. I'm going to do 5 khatams of Quran, I'm going to do these awrad, and I'm going to read this when I'm there and this and that. But the reality is that we'd like to have a ritual, and we'd like to have all these things we're going to complete, but travelling shakes that and throws that all out the window sometimes. And so you've got to realise, I think the main focus on Hajj is not about achieving all these things, rather about what you're going to learn about yourself on this journey. And sometimes those circumstances that are thrown upon you and completely throw everything out the window are actually, that's the real Hajj experience. So don't become, as I said, I don't discourage people from having a plan. That's good in your Hajj, that you have certain things you want to do, but at the same time be open to the experience, and don't make it something like it becomes a ritual. Rather, it becomes an interaction with God, Allah, in your journey on your Hajj. That's the whole Hajj. And so Hajj itself in Arabic means, does anyone know what it means, Hajj? Linguistically? No?
Is it from Hajra, like to leave, to move, to make a journey?
That's Hajra. Hajj means to direct yourself towards something of veneration.
Okay.
So that gives you the understanding of what the Hajj is. You're going towards something that's of high value, of that's to be venerated, and that is what fundamentally is you're heading towards the Kaaba. But the thing is, what is the Kaaba? That's what we've got to. How do we understand the Kaaba? We obviously know, if we look at it historically, there's this, there's nothing substantial to prove this, but the strongest opinion is that the Kaaba was there, it was established by the angels before Adam alayhi salam, and it's the place where we were sent to on the earth, and the Kaaba is a reflection of the other celestial bodies or structures in the other heavens. So it's a central point. It's like the epicenter or the world navel of all this gross existence that we see before us, and so and that we believe that the Kaaba is the center of the gross universe, this physical world, and it manifested and solidified from the water. From the water came up, and then from the rest of the earth it spread out, which is significant for us spiritually, because we see it as it's our center, our core. Wherever we may be living in all different areas of the world, all scattered, but we come back to this focal point, this center that everyone needs, and that center really is a reflection of our center. So the Kaaba is the secret. So when we're heading towards the Kaaba, and this is what we do, is we all think, have you all done Umrah before?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is, when I did Hajj first, I didn't do Umrah. So when I went on Hajj the first time, I thought, my goodness me, I can't wait till the Kaaba, something amazing is going to happen. But then sometimes when you go there and you see it for the first time, I looked up and I just went, oh, there it is. I don't know what your experience was like, but there's some people sit down crying their eyes out, and there's other people just okay. But what I want you to see the Kaaba is. It's like a meeting point with you and your center. So it's a time of self-inquiry. Just like, so when you're moving on your journey, it's as if it's like a journey of self-inquiry to your center, like you're physically going. And that the journey itself of the Hajj is the actual Hajj experience. Because when we go on our journey, a lot of the time we're sitting, when are we going to be there? Oh my goodness me, this is taking too long. But that, I want you to see, that is the Hajj itself. So you're not looking for it to be somewhere else. Rather, this is it. So then you don't, because it really, in reality, when you go on the Hajj, that's all it is. It's just you sitting in one place, waiting. Next place, waiting. Next place, waiting, until before you know it's all over. And so what's the difference between that and being in the airport then, really? So that is part of the thing. So to sit there and be in the moment and not be waiting to go somewhere else, because that defeats the whole purpose of the whole journey. And so it is the experience itself. And so the Kaaba was initially established by the angels, then by Adam alayhi salam. It was lost on us with the flood, and then it was re-established by Ibrahim alayhi salam, and then he made the calling for people to perform it. And we believe that he called to all the souls. So when he made that call out to people to perform the Hajj, it wasn't just the people there at the time. There was no one there really present at the time. Rather, it's to all the people throughout history to the end of time who would answer that call. And so that's what, and the Kaaba is a reflection of the six directions that we can, six directions that we relate to in existence. North, south, north, and northeast, west, never east, really, north, south, west, and above us and below us. But what's so interesting about the Kaaba is, so that's how we relate to the world, isn't it? We're in a place that's surrounded by six directions, and we can't experience life without that. But what's so interesting about the Kaaba is that once you get into the Kaaba itself, where do you pray? You pray outside of yourself. So it's not about, even when you get into the center, there's still this sense of the mystery still there. And now it's looking out. So even when you become interested, when you reach your core, then you have to look out, of yourself. And so it's not about getting somewhere. It's about that whole experience of questioning and self-inquiry, who I am, and so forth. And that's really what the Kaaba is all about. Really, it's this black, and it's clothed in black, which is that symbol of the secret, the mystery, the black hole. If you think about it, that's just pulling everything towards it. And then once you even get there, it's just mystery, it's a secret upon a secret. And so I see that the journey of the Hajj as an an expression of dying, rebirth, which expresses an expansion of your conscious being. Okay, and I'm going to look at that on the slides. So if we look at the first slide, it says the reward of an accepted pilgrimage is nothing but paradise. And then we have the other hadith, which actually comes up in another slide, about whoever performs Hajj and doesn't engage in sexual relations and commits fisq, i.e. disobedience and so forth, he comes back as if from his sins he's forgiven of his sins like the day he was born. And so it's a rebirth. That's the concept of the Hajj. It's a death to one part of your life. It's a rebirth. It's a get life to another part, a new life, and that's the real expression of that is expansion of your consciousness. And what do I mean by that? I mean, so for example, when you were a 5-year-old and your dad said, or your mum said to you, "What do you want?" You might say ice cream. And then when you reach 8, your parents ask what you want, and it's an iPad. And then when you're 15, what do you want? You know, I don't know, what 15, what do they want? I don't know. iPhone. Then when it's there, it's a car. So what you're seeing is your consciousness is, and your desires are expanding, because the ice cream's not as lasting as an iPad, and iPad's maybe not as it's as beneficial as a car or so forth. So your desires expand as you grow as a human being, and so your consciousness is growing towards something that's more lasting. And so that eventually manifests in you're no longer so attached to the gross things, the material things like a car, and you think 5 years ago I'd look at that and say I've got to have that, but now I look at things and I think no, that's not important to me anymore. So I believe this is the real Hajj experience, and which we come to at the end of the course is, how do I know my Hajj has been accepted? That's the big question, and that's the mystery in itself. Is that I believe it's an expansion of the your consciousness, where you basically, hang on a minute, there's been a shift here, and that shift can be very, very subtle, or could be very, very obvious to you. It could be the most obvious is someone who wasn't really practicing or focused on their religion. Now it becomes something even more important to them in whatever way that is. For some people, it could be very subtle. It's just like I look at things just differently. My focus is slightly off. So I believe that's an expression of acceptance from Allah, that He's given you an opportunity, an avenue to a new way of looking at things that is of benefit to you. And so that's the reward that I look at, obviously, because that's more tangible than obviously just looking at it purely from a spiritual point of view. It's sometimes difficult to gauge. Now, if in the third slide on the first page, what also I want you to conceptualize is the movement of the existence. We look at the year. So you'll see that Muharram is the first month, isn't it? Then Safar and Rabi' al-Awwal, and this is the spring, which is also the spring of your life, which is infancy. So that the cycles of the time are an expression of movement through your life. And so you'll see spring, and then you'll go into summer, youth, Rabi' al-Thani, Jumad al-Ula, Jumad al-Ukhra. And isn't it interesting that Rajab is the first of the sacred months? Okay, because that moves you into adulthood, which is, let's say, 40 years for the sake of it, which is where you're, the age of prophecy, because it's an age of real self-inquiry and introspection, isn't it now? That's where people start having midlife crises, because they're thinking, where am I going in life? Before that, I say, before you're 30, you can abuse your body, sleep wild hours and do all sorts of things, and you get away with it. When you hit between 35 to 40, that's when your body it starts deteriorating. You have to think, I need to focus actually on things and live life according to its rules. And so there's this shift at Rajab, which is the first of the sacred months. The Arabs would generally, before Islam, they would perform Umrah in that month. That was considered a very sacred month to the Arabs even before Islam. Now we've got a shift. We're moving Sha'ban, Ramadan. Notice Ramadan's the last third of adulthood, which is Ramadan's a month of detoxification. And so now you're moving into it's a recognition that we're moving into another stage, which is the last stage, which is the winter, which is old age. And we've got Shawwal, which is now the first of the sacred months that are consecutive. So you've got Rajab, which is separate. Then we've got Shawwal is the first. So people will be performing. People will be preparing for Hajj at this point. This Shawwal is a month when it's actually permissible for you to go into a state of ihram. Okay, obviously we wouldn't do this in this day. You know, that'd be crazy to do that now. But people would actually start their journeys a lot of the time in Shawwal, depending on where they were in the world. And then Dhul Qa'dah is another month of preparation. And then we move into Dhul Hijjah. So Dhul Hijjah is the last month of the year, but it's also the last portion of your life, if you think about it, in terms of your, the year and your life. And it's the last third. And if you look at Ramadan, what's the most sacred days of Ramadan?
The last 10.
The last 10, which is the last 10 moving you from that adult stage into old age. And then what's the most sacred days of Dhul Hijjah? The first 10. Okay, which if we focus on it, they say Ramadan, it's the night, the nights, while they say Dhul Hijjah, the first 10, it's the days. Okay, which is interesting. I want you to think about these things. This is what the Hajj is all about, thinking what's the significance of this. And so it's the first 10, so it's the first third of the last third, if that makes sense to you. So now you're really feeling this sense of imminence of something major happening. Why do you think people make New Year's resolutions? Because they realise it's a feeling, it's a sense of you're dying, and then there's this opportunity of rebirth, isn't there? And so, sorry, I've made a mistake here. Shawwal is not one of the sacred months. It's Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, and then the last one is Muharram. Sorry, so Muharram moves you into that. That's the journey back. And so, what do we mean by they're sacred? Before Islam, why were these months sacred?
The prohibited months, so they wouldn't have wars.
Exactly. And why would they not fight in those months?
Respite.
Go on, Shabana?
Respite.
Well, why though? So that people could travel to perform the Hajj.
Okay.
So Rajab was sacred so people could perform their Umrah. And then Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah and Muharram were sacred so there was no fighting so they could get there. Dhul Qa'dah means the month of sitting, literally. So they would refrain from fighting. And then Dhul Hijjah is the month of performing the Hajj. And then Muharram is a sacred month so people could return safely as well. And so this reinforces this concept of rebirth, doesn't it? Okay, sense of you dying and a rebirth as well. And then what's really beautiful, this hadith at the bottom of this slide, time has come back on itself like the day God created the heavens and the earth. The year is 12 months, 4 are sacred. And so the Prophet ﷺ, when did he say this? Do you know? This hadith. This was done on the day of Arafah. So the Prophet ﷺ was standing at Arafah, the most significant place in the most significant place in the most significant time. The most important day of Hajj, which is the end of the year now, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, and he's in the most powerful place where the ultimate forgiveness comes down in the year. Because this is another really important concept about the Hajj is that we need members of our community in a certain place at a certain time to access the ultimate forgiveness of the year. So the Jews have this concept as well of the holiest of holies. I don't know if you know about Yom al-Kippur.
Yeah.
Basically, in the old days, but when they still had Masjid al-Aqsa, when it was theirs, they would have to have the chief priest, behind the veils in the holiest of holies where they had the Ark of Covenant, and they had to have a man there at that specific time, at that specific day, for the forgiveness, there was no forgiveness for the rest of the year. So we have a sort of similar concept, but it's not some elitist exercise where there's only one specific individual that can be there. For us, it's all of us can be there, no matter who we are, regardless of our station. So that's really important to be mindful of that there. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, now when he was standing there, which is really beautiful, because if you see this as a clock, this of the year, he says time has come back on itself, like it was when Allah created it. Because the Arabs before Islam, what did they do? They used to play around with the months because they didn't like the sacred months sometimes to fall into places when they wanted to actually attack people. So they used to say, well, Muharram, no, it's not Muharram. We're going to shift it like a leap year, basically. They say Muharram's going to be next month. We're going to bring Safar in first. And because they played around with the months, it ended up, the whole, it all went out of sync. So it came to a point where they didn't even know when Dhul Hijjah really was. So the Arabs didn't know whether they're performing Hajj really in the right month. And so, but the Prophet ﷺ, when he came, imagine it, he's standing at this centre, if you can imagine it, and everything falls in sync at that moment for forgiveness. At that time, at that place. And he's saying time has come back on itself in sync like the day Allah created it. So there's a harmonisation, there's a balance now to the creation. And so that's a very, very beautiful analogy of seeing that basically the Hajj is the whole purpose of the Hajj is to bring you back into equilibrium with your nature and in congruence with the creation around you as well. Okay, yeah.
Were these months created from the time of Adam?
Basically these were set. Allah says He gave the time 12 months from the creation of the heavens and the earth. He says there are 12, 4 are sacred, and we mentioned them, 3 are consecutive, and then one of them is between Jumad al-Ukhra and Sha'ban. Okay. So we come to another concept here, and I thought there wasn't a mistake here. Actually, that should be it. It should be separation first. I need to correct that. Separation, initiation, and return. So you'll notice that the circle I've got there. This is a concept I took from Joseph Campbell. It's the hero's journey, which is that we are constantly going through new expansions of consciousness, from separation from our current form of consciousness, then initiation into a new consciousness, and then a returning back to where we initially were, but with a completely different way of looking at things. So a good example of that is like school. Remember, you had a conception of how life was before you went to school, and then suddenly you go to school that day, and it's probably traumatizing for most of us. I can still remember the day myself. Okay, and I've been dragged from my mum by the headmistress and crying my eyes out and looking back at how, mum, can you do this to me, you nasty. And then,
It's gonna be ours.
and you have to let go, don't you, as parents? And you have to, if you like say, no, my baby's not going to suffer, you're ending up doing the detriment to the child, really. And so you have to let a child go to experience that death. That's a death if you think about it. It's a death to the life with mummy, where she's the centre of attention, to now they're going to mix with other people, and now there's other imperatives and more important things, other important things to focus on in life. So, but when they come back that day, or maybe 3 days, 4 days, regardless, whether it's they've assimilated, they're looking at the home in a completely different way now, aren't they? And so there's this, and that's just one example. I mean, there's the womb. If you think about it, it probably starts even before that. But there's this constant moving from one cycle to another cycle, and then coming back to where you initially were and looking at it completely differently. And it's not a pleasant experience, that separation to initiation, but it's a necessary one if we want to grow. Our consciousness wants to grow. So that's what we're doing on the Hajj. Does that make sense? So, and this is a real difficulty for us in this modern day, because we pay for our Hajj packages, and so we see this experience as sort of our right, and it should be in a certain way for us, because I paid for, I gave this amount of money, and the old days it was never like that, was it? You just get on the journey, and everyone's in the same situation. You got there, and then the Meccan people hosted you, and it wasn't. I don't think they hosted people differently according to this. They didn't know who you were. But now it's a completely different kettle of fish. Now we go to Hajj with expectations, and I don't blame. It's natural. We're going to have to do that. We've paid money, and we put a lot of importance to our money. But we have to realise that once we've made that decision with whoever we're going with, that's it. Now there's little you can do about it, apart from fill out the feedback forms at the end. So, and that's important, feedback forms. But whilst you're in the journey, just write that down and say, I'll deal with that later. But when you're on the journey, there's little you can do. But we all crack. I cracked at one point. I've got my stories through the Hajj experience of where I made. I'm like the dad that comes and says, "Kids, this is where I fell, and I don't want you to make the same mistakes." So, found that you had a mistake.
What was the author called of that book?
Joseph. It's not. He's got a book called The Faces, The Mask of a Thousand Faces, or something. I can't. Well, it's Joseph Campbell. He's got this concept called the hero's journey. It's very, very important, I think, in life. It's used in all films. If you think about films like Star Wars, Matrix, all these, it's this concept of you're going through a journey as a hero of your life, and that you're moving through different phases, and so it's a very, very powerful thing. And so he who performs the Hajj, here we mentioned that hadith. So this, and notice I've put it anti-clockwise. Why do you think that's relevant?
That's how you do tawaf.
And what's the idea of going anti-clockwise is what?
Is it that you're recentering yourself?
Could be, yeah, good. Any other ideas? So that's one thing, recentering. The other thing is that you're sort of going back to your source, aren't you? Because if you think about time, it feels like you're moving away from something, your source. But when we're doing tawaf, we're reminding that, and some, I don't know about this from a science perspective, but some say actually the reality is we are going back. I don't know how that is from the time is actually going backwards. So, but the reality is it's a reminder that we are going actually back to our source. We're not going away from something. Well, time makes you feel like that, doesn't it? It makes you feel like you're just progressing to something that's, you know, constantly growing, and it's you're going further away from your initial place. But that's not how we see it as Muslims. We see we're going back to our source, if you think about it, isn't it? We were in heaven, our souls, and then we came out of that place, and we're going back to it. And so that's another thing I'd like you to think about as you're going on the Hajj. And the last concept is this idea of comfort, challenge, and collapse, which is very significant for the actual Hajj rites, I think. I have this concept. I didn't come up with this, but there's this idea is that we live in three zones in our life. We live in comfort, we live in challenge, or we can be in collapse. You're never in you're never really in any other area. So if you think about it, when you're born, you see the womb as comfort, yeah, and then the moment you come out of the womb, it's challenge, isn't it? Because as long as you are experiencing as long as you're faced with a new experience in life, you are being challenged, because you're having to what's the word? You have to find an equilibrium to the environment that you've come into, and so that's a challenge, and it's stressful. And then eventually, once that calms down and you find that equilibrium, you come back to comfort. Now, if you notice, as you're young, the youngsters generally are more resilient than older people. Why?
We're more resilient.
Yeah, I say kids are more resilient than adults.
Really?
Oh yes, 100%. Especially when you hit 40, you're fine.
Because they've not been kind of affected by the societal expectations and norms, so they make their own kind of. Okay, from that perspective, I look at it from a different perspective. Is that they're constantly in challenge. Because you're always, if you're a youngster, if you're at school, you're constantly, everything's, the goalposts are always shifting, and you're having to always, what's the word I'm trying to find? Not re-equilibrium, that's not a word. You're trying to find a homeostasis, is that? So,
constant balance and
yeah, you're trying to find that balance, aren't you? When you're a youngster, it's constantly, you're constantly going in and out of comfort, challenge, and sometimes you're going to collapse. Collapse is like a death of a loved one, you know, a situation where you just cannot cope, and you just collapse, and then you have to go to comfort. We're not saying comfort's bad. You know, sometimes you need to go for the ice cream tub in the movie, just so, or the blanket. You know, you throw it over and you just need to shut off. That's a natural. You need to go back to that. So as you get older, the challenge, you actually expose yourself less to challenge, because they become habits, don't they? If you think about it, when you reach about 30, you're stuck in a job that you've been in for the last 6 years. It's pretty much standard, say in and out of the office, come home, and so you're less. And then even more so when you become when you retire, it becomes even more so that you spend more time in comfort than challenge. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
What's the problem with that though? If you're constantly in comfort, guess what happens?
Don't like coming out of
your comfort zone. No, it's not that your comfort zone constricts on you, because the idea is that nothing is static. Nothing is constantly shifting. Okay, it's either constricting or expanding. So once you move into challenge, your comfort zone expands, so you can deal with challenges better. But so we say, oh, it'd be so nice if I always could be in my little comfort zone and do that. What actually happens when you stay in your comfort zone, it restricts on you. So you get these old kid people, they can't even cope with stepping outside their own house, because they're so in their comfort zone now that even though comfort's become a constriction on them. And so that was a real realization for me, because we think staying comfort's going to be the way to solve the solution, but it's not. You've got to constantly be challenging yourself, and that you will go sometimes move into collapse. But if you can cope with challenge, eventually collapse becomes something that is less frequent, and you don't have to spend so much time in your comfort zone as you used to. Now, why is this relevant for Hajj? I see, if you think about the Hajj rites, you're at the Kaaba, which is maybe we could see it comfort here, and then you move into Mina, and then you move into where? Arafat. You're moving out of the Haram, because the Haram is Mina. I think it reaches to Muzdalifah, and the Quraysh would never step out of their comfort zone. They believed they were sacred people for a sacred place, so they never used to, before Islam, they never used to go and join the pilgrims at Arafat. They would say we're too holy. But the idea is that we've all got to get out there into our collapse, where it's basically you and Allah, and because Allah wants you to get into collapse sometimes, so that you can realise that you aren't in control, and Allah's the one in control, and that's when you feel your desperation and need for Him. Okay, so these are just some concepts. Those three charts I've given you to return back to think about what's going on, and I hope it gives a bit more relevance and significance to the journey. And then let me just review my points to see if I've not missed anything. Yeah, and another thing about the Hajj is that it's an expansion of the consciousness that's achieved through three. You're moving into different places, obviously. You're seeing different people. So this is more relevant for people that live in Keighley, we're very insular. Is that when you get to Leeds, it's like being in a completely different universe. You see Muslims that aren't Asian, which is very strange. And then, so the Hajj is that experience, isn't it? If you think about it, my goodness me, there's Muslims from Indonesia and there's Muslims from China. So you're getting expansion of consciousness of places, people, and then experiences. The Hajj experience is like no other experience. It's unique, and it's only at a certain time and a certain place. And a lot of people only perform it once in their lifetime. But even then, if people perform it, even on a number of occasions, each experience is different. So people, you may have experienced this, going on Umrah each time seems like a different experience. It becomes addictive. People want to go back. And so why? Because it's an expansion of the consciousness. If it was the same experience all the time, then it wouldn't have that sort of draw. So don't see your journey as a checklist, and have a plan, but do not be regimented to it. I'll be mentioning that. Okay. So we're doing that's fine. So the next slide, those performing the major minor pilgrimages, i.e. the Hajj or the Umrah, are the delegates of God. If they call upon Him, He answers, and if they ask forgiveness, He forgives them. So I said this at the beginning, this highlighting this sense of responsibility, and also this honour that your du'as are accepted. And then God forgives. The next slide, God forgive the pilgrim and for the one he asks forgiveness for. Then this raises a point. A lot of people before Hajj, what do? Before heading off? They ask for forgiveness, okay? But so they send out the texts, don't they? They bombard people with all these texts saying, I'm going. We didn't do that in the old days. What did they do in the old days? You go around and visit people. Now, that's not necessary, okay, for people to do. A lot of people in our community think it's absolute necessity. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a cultural thing. And I'm not saying culture's bad, but I'm just saying, but sometimes we have to be realistic though, because what happens is, the few nights before you're going on Hajj, everyone's coming over to you. And it's really, really important that the night before Hajj is that you get as much sleep as you possibly can. Are you going in the morning, or are you flying in the morning?
We're flying at night.
You're flying at night. Where from?
Heathrow.
Oh, Heathrow. So you're driving down there. Okay. And you are?
2 o'clock in the afternoon from Heathrow.
Oh, you're all going from London, are you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I was going to speak more about Manchester, because if you're going at Manchester in the morning, it's a big issue. So I stay over. Whenever I go to Manchester, I've got a flight in the morning, I stay over in a hotel, because Manchester's a nightmare. Like, people even set off 3 hours before they end up missing their flights. So, but for you guys, you have to. I don't know what you have to sort your logistics out. But get there to the airport, obviously, the 3 hours. So don't take any risks. I mean, even when I went down to London, when I fly from Stansted, I get a hotel the night before, just so I'm fresh. So that a B&B, and then it's just you're a lot more focused and refreshed. So that's always an option for people. The next thing,
just stepping back slightly.
Yeah.
Asking for forgiveness, is this like sunnah, or is this just something culture just
it's the thing that's required, like the Prophet ﷺ said to Umar when he went to perform, I'm going to make dua for me. So he requested that he make dua for him, and so it's recommended for people who know people going on Hajj to ask them to make dua for them. So that some people might even make a list for you that could you make dua for this, and you know that's a good thing. It feels like you're going as an ambassador to represent your people. So none of these things are required. None of these things are necessary. They're just either they're just etiquettes or good things to do, or they're cultural, and so if they start interfering where they cause difficulty for you, don't feel guilty by saying I won't be able to see you tomorrow, or can you come over to ours instead of us, but you're going to have to leave it. So I know with the Asian community it's hard to assert your boundaries sometimes. So
Sheikh, kind of culturally, I think we were told that kind of the feeling was that if for Allah SWT to forgive you, people have to forgive you first. So if you've wronged anybody, you have to ask forgiveness from them first before Allah SWT will forgive you on Arafah. So is that just a cultural thing?
Yeah, I mean, no, you're required, if you know you've done something wrong to someone, and you say, let's give a scenario. Say, for example, you cheated someone, or you spoke badly of someone, and it reached them, and they're upset with you, and so forth. You try to correct those things before going. Okay. But I think and that's generally a few individuals. That's not going to be the whole lot. I'm not saying it's bad to send out that text, and but I don't think many people take it very seriously.
No.
If I was upset with Shabana, and she sent me a text, "Well, I'm going tomorrow on Hajj. Can you forgive me?" I'm not going to forgive her. That's so that's how people communicate with one another these days. Actually, even marriage issues. It's like I'm WhatsApping my wife why I'm not, trying to solve the problem. You can't do that, and so. If it's something, people, what do? They usually before Hajj they make sure they return things back that they haven't, that they've got of other people's property, paying off debts and stuff, sorting out inheritance and so forth. This was even more relevant in the old days because people didn't know they were coming back because it was such a journey. This day and age, it's less. I'm not saying it's less relevant because anything can happen. We don't know that, and I'm not saying these things are bad, wrong to do, but they're not necessities. Okay, but as I said, it's not. They're encouraged to do. Regardless, we should do that whenever we're leaving home. We don't know what things.
Should you have a will in place?
We should all have a will in place. Really, in reality, if you think about it, constantly.
So you don't need to have one before you go on Hajj then?
I'm not saying it's not a necessity. These are things that are good to do, but not necessities. So don't. The question comes up usually: can I go on Hajj because I've got debts? Well, you shouldn't be asking that question because you've already bought your Hajj ticket. It's like the guy that phones me up and says, "Are prawns halal?" And I'm saying, "What are you eating?" So no, you can go on Hajj with debts. It's not a problem. It's not It's not an obligation for you to go on Hajj with debts, but it's still thing. So, but these things should try to be sorted out to the best of their ability, if you can. Okay, but once you've embarked on the journey, just put that all to the side and just deal with it. Any more questions about those things? No.